The morning sun rose gently over the small town of Maplewood, painting the rooftops with a pale gold light. Inside a cozy white cottage at the edge of town, Evelyn Parker sat quietly at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The house was still, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from absence. Every tick of the old wall clock reminded her of how empty her days had become since her husband. Richard passed away 6 months ago. She had lived in that home with him for nearly 40 years. Every corner carried his memory, his laughter that once filled the kitchen, the faint smell of his cologne still clinging to his favorite jacket by the door, and the deep dents his boots left on the wooden floor near the fireplace. Evelyn didn't move those boots. She couldn't. It felt like erasing him. And she wasn't ready for that as she stirred her tea. Her eyes drifted toward the chair across from her, Richard's chair. She still placed a cup of coffee there every morning, out of habit or maybe hope. "Good morning, love," she whispered softly, like she did every day. The silence that followed was her only answer. Evelyn tried to keep busy gardening, reading, baking, but the quietness of the house pressed in around her. The phone rang suddenly, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up and heard her daughter's familiar voice. "Hi, Mom," Claire said warmly. "I know it's last minute, but I was wondering if Noah could stay with you this weekend. He's been missing Grandpa a lot lately, and I think it might do him good to spend some time there." Evelyn's heart softened at the mention of her 10-year-old grandson. Noah was her light, her reason to smile after Richard's passing. "Of course, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'd love that. I'll bake his favorite cookies." Later that afternoon, Evelyn stood by the front window, watching as Claire's car pulled into the driveway. Noah stepped out, clutching his small backpack, his shoulders slightly hunched. He waved shyly before walking up the path. Evelyn noticed how much he had grown taller, more serious, his eyes older than his age. "Hi, Grandma," he said, giving her a polite hug. His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "Oh, my dear boy," Evelyn said, holding him a little longer. "I've missed you." He smiled faintly, then glanced around the house as if searching for something familiar. Evelyn knew what that was, Richard's presence. They spent the first evening together quietly. Evelyn baked chocolate chip cookies while Noah helped by stirring the dough, though most of the chips ended up in his mouth. It was comforting to hear his small laughter again. After dinner, they sat on the living room couch, flipping through an old photo album. Pictures of Richard holding a much younger Noah made them both fall silent. Noah traced a small finger over one photo. Richard kneeling beside him in the garden. Both of them smiling proudly at a crooked birdhouse they'd built together. "Grandpa said we'd make another one next summer," Noah said softly. Evelyn's heart ached. "He wanted to," she whispered. "He loved spending time with you." For a while, they sat in silence, each lost in their own memories. Evelyn could see the questions swirling in Noah's eyes, the ones he couldn't quite ask. She didn't press him. Grief was something she'd learned to handle quietly, and she wanted to give him the same space later. As she tucked him into bed, he asked suddenly, "Grandma, do you think Grandpa is still around somewhere?" The question caught her off guard. She smiled faintly, smoothing his hair. "Yes, darling. Maybe not the way we remember, but I believe he is. In the garden, in the stars, in the little things that make us smile." Noah nodded, his eyes heavy with sleep. "I hope he knows I miss him." "Think he does," she whispered, kissing his forehead. After he drifted off, Evelyn stood at the doorway for a long moment, watching him. In his peaceful face, she saw traces of Richard, his kindness, his patience, that quiet strength. It was comforting and painful all at once. She closed the door softly and returned to her room. The night stretched long. Evelyn couldn't sleep, so she sat by the window, looking out into the moonlit garden. The flowers Richard had planted still bloomed faithfully, roses, daisies, lavender, each one a small memory frozen in color. She thought about how often she had found him there, humming under his breath as he worked with his hands in the soil. She missed that sound more than anything, the gentle humming, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the way he always made her laugh no matter how tired she felt. Without him, everything seemed muted. Even the birds that sang outside in the mornings sounded Lonelier as she sat there. A small sound broke her thoughts' footsteps. She turned and saw Noah standing in the doorway, clutching his pillow. "Grandma," he whispered, "I can't sleep. Can I stay with you?" "Of course, sweetheart," she said softly. Patting the bed beside her, he climbed in quietly, curling up beside her like he did when he was little. For a while, neither of them spoke. The house was so still that Evelyn could hear his breathing. After a few minutes, Noah said, "Grandpa used to tell me stories when I couldn't sleep. About when he was in the army or when you first met him. Do you remember those stories?" Evelyn smiled in the dim light. "Oh, I do. He never told them the same way twice. Every time he'd add something new just to make me laugh." "What was your favorite one?" Noah asked, his voice small and curious. Evelyn thought for a moment. "The one where he said he saw me walking my dog and he tripped over the sidewalk trying to talk to me. He always said it was love at first stumble." Noah giggled softly, and the sound filled the room like sunlight after rain. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Instead, she smiled through them. It felt good to remember, to share, to let the warmth of those memories breathe again. Noah yawned and nestled closer. "I wish he could tell me more stories." "He told you plenty," she said, brushing his hair back gently. "You just have to remember them. That's how people we love stay with us, through stories, laughter, and the little things they taught us." He nodded sleepily, and within moments he was fast asleep. Evelyn watched him, her heart swelling with love and sorrow. She realized then that grief wasn't something you got over, it was something you learned to carry. And in moments like this, it didn't feel as heavy outside. The rain began to fall softly, tapping against the windows like a lullaby. Evelyn leaned back against the headboard, her eyes closing slowly. She whispered one last thought before sleep took her. "You'd be proud of him, Richard. He's so much like you." That night, Evelyn dreamt of Richard, not as a memory, but as something vivid and alive. In her dream, he stood in the garden, smiling at her with that same twinkle in his eyes. He didn't speak, but she didn't need him to. The warmth in his gaze said enough. When she woke, her heart felt lighter, as if a quiet message had passed between them. The next morning, the house felt different. The air seemed fresher, brighter. Evelyn walked to the kitchen and found Noah already awake, sitting at the table, eating cereal. He looked up at her and smiled, really smiled this time. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something return. Not the past, but a sense of peace. She realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the people you lost. It was about remembering them in new ways, through laughter, through family, through moments of love that still lived quietly in the heart. And somewhere deep down, she knew that weekend with Noah would change something for both of them. It was the start of healing, the slow return of light after a long, gray season. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but before the weekend ended, one simple gesture, an unexpected hug from her grandson, would remind her of everything love could still be, even after goodbye. The next morning began with the smell of toast and sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. Evelyn stood by the kitchen counter, spreading butter on bread while the coffee brewed. The soft hum of the old radio played in the background, an old song Richard used to love. She found herself smiling faintly as she tapped her fingers against the counter. Lost in the rhythm, Noah shuffled into the kitchen, his hair messy, still half asleep, but smiling. "Morning, Grandma," he mumbled. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, setting a plate in front of him. "Eat out, we've got a busy day ahead." "Busy doing what?" he asked, his mouth already full. "We're going to the garden," she said warmly. "It needs some care, just like old times with your grandpa." His eyes lit up. "Really? Can I help?" "That's the plan," she smiled. By mid-morning, the two were in the backyard. The garden stretched behind the house, full of overgrown flowers, fallen leaves, and the faint scent of earth after last night's rain. The wooden fence Richard had built years ago still stood, though weathered and faded. Evelyn knelt down, pulling weeds, while Noah fetched the watering can. "You know," Evelyn said, glancing at him, "your grandpa used to talk to these plants as if they were his friends. He believed they listened. Noah laughed softly. That's silly. Maybe, she said, smiling, but somehow everything he planted grew beautifully. They worked quietly for a while, Noah watering the flowers while Evelyn trimmed the dead stems. Every so often, he'd glance at her, watching how careful she was with each plant, as if tending to a memory. He didn't say much, but he could feel how much this place meant to her. After a while, they took a break. Sitting on the wooden bench under the old oak tree, Noah asked, "Grandma, were you sad when Grandpa got sick?" Evelyn looked out at the garden before answering. "Yes, very sad. But you know what? He never wanted me to stop living. He made me promise that I'd keep smiling no matter how much it hurt. Did you?" She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I'm trying. Some days it's easier. Some days it's not." Noah frowned, thinking for a moment. "I think Grandpa would be happy you're still taking care of the garden." Evelyn's chest tightened. "I hope so." The rest of the morning passed peacefully. They planted new seeds, fixed the small wooden birdhouse that had fallen, and cleared out the patch near the rose bushes. When they finished, Noah stood back proudly. "It looks way better now." Evelyn nodded. "Yes, it does. You did a wonderful job." He grinned, wiping dirt from his hands. "I think Grandpa would have liked it." Her eyes softened. "He would have loved it." That afternoon, they had lunch together, sandwiches and lemonade on the porch. The air was warm, and a gentle breeze carried the sound of wind chimes. Noah looked at the sky, then turned to her suddenly. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever feel lonely?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. It wasn't the kind of question she expected from a 10-year-old. "Sometimes," she admitted softly. "When you live with someone for so long and they're suddenly gone, the house feels too quiet." "I get lonely too," he said quietly. "After Grandpa, Mom works a lot, and I miss when we used to all be together." Evelyn looked at him with warmth and sadness. "You miss the way things used to be." He nodded. "Yeah." She reached over, resting her hand gently on his. "It's okay to miss people. That's what love is. Noah, missing them, remembering them, and still finding reasons to smile." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "You know what I miss most? His hugs. Grandpa gave the best hugs. They always made me feel safe." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "He really did." Noah leaned his head against her shoulder. They've sat like that for a long time, neither speaking. The world around them calm and still. Later that day, Noah noticed the small wooden shed at the edge of the garden. "What's in there?" he asked curiously. "Oh," Evelyn said, brushing off her apron. "That's your grandpa's old workshop. He used to fix things there, mostly for fun. Can we see it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, it's been a while." The door creaked as they opened it. Dust floated in the sunlight streaming through the tiny window. Tools hung neatly on the wall, and an unfinished birdhouse sat on the table, covered in cobwebs. Evelyn's heart ached at the sight of it. The last project Richard. It started before he got too sick to finish. "Did he make all these?" Noah asked, running his fingers along the workbench. "Yes," she said softly. "He was always building something." Noah picked up the unfinished birdhouse, studying it carefully. "We should finish this," he said. Suddenly, Evelyn blinked, surprised. "You think so?" He nodded with determination. "It's what Grandpa would have wanted." Something inside her shifted, a small spark of warmth she hadn't felt in months. "All right," she said gently. "Then we'll finish it together." They worked for hours, sanding, painting, and piecing it together. Evelyn showed him how to hammer the small nails, guiding his hand when he struggled. It wasn't perfect. The roof was slightly crooked, and the paint smudged. But when they finally placed it in the garden, it felt right. As they stood back to admire their work, Noah smiled proudly. "It looks great, Grandma." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the sharp sting of grief. Instead, there was warmth. The quiet realization that love didn't end when someone was gone. It simply changed shape. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They watched the colors shift, the birdhouse glowing softly in the fading light. Evelyn placed her arm around Noah, pulling him close. "You know, Noah," she said softly, "I think your grandpa would be very proud of you." He smiled. "Really?" "Absolutely. You brought his garden back to life." He looked up at her, his eyes thoughtful. "Grandma, do you think people can feel love even after they're gone?" Evelyn smiled gently, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "I think love never leaves. It just finds new ways to stay with us." They sat together until the last bit of daylight faded. When they finally went inside, Evelyn felt lighter. The garden, the laughter, smell of fresh soil. It had all awakened something she thought she'd lost forever that night. As Noah got ready for bed, he turned to her and said, "Grandma, can I sleep in Grandpa's chair tonight? Just for a bit." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, darling." She watched him climb into the old armchair, wrapping himself in a blanket. The sight made her heart ache, but also swell with love. He looked so peaceful, sitting where Richard used to sit every night with a book and a cup of tea. After a while, Noah looked up and said softly, "Grandpa always said you had the kindest heart." "I think he was right." Evelyn's throat tightened. "That's sweet of you to say." He smiled sleepily. "I mean it." Moments later, he was fast asleep, his small hand resting on the armrest where Richard's had once been. Evelyn stood there quietly, her heart full. She realized that love wasn't just in the grand gestures. It was in moments like this, quiet and unspoken. As she turned off the light, she whispered to the darkness, "Thank you, Richard, for sending him to me when I needed him most." That night, for the first time in months, Evelyn slept soundly. The emptiness didn't feel so heavy anymore. The house, once so silent, now felt alive again, filled with warmth, laughter, and the soft rhythm of life moving forward. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would bring something even more special. A moment that would remind her that love, in all its quiet forms, was still very much alive. The next morning began softly, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Evelyn stood by the stove, stirring oatmeal, while the sound of Noah's quiet humming drifted from the living room. He was sitting in her late husband's old armchair again, reading a book, his hair messy from sleep. She paused for a moment, just watching him. Something about the sight brought warmth to her chest. A familiar comfort she hadn't felt in so long. When Noah noticed her looking, he smiled. "Morning, Grandma." "Morning, sweetheart," she said, returning his smile. "Hungry?" "Always." He grinned, closing the book and walking to the table as they ate. Noah talked about school, his friends, and the camping trip he wanted to take with his dad someday. Evelyn listened, laughing softly, happy to hear the excitement in his voice. But deep down she felt a tug, that bittersweet feeling of time passing too quickly. After breakfast, he suggested they go outside. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and the garden looked more alive than ever. The flowers they'd planted just days ago were already beginning to bloom. Evelyn couldn't help but smile as she looked around. The place no longer felt lonely, it felt loved. "Grandma," Noah said suddenly, "I want to show you something." He ran inside, returning with a small wooden box. Inside it were colorful stones, seashells, and tiny notes folded neatly. "What's this?" Evelyn asked curiously. "It's my memory box," he said proudly. "Mom told me to keep things that make me happy. So I put stuff in here, and I want to add something from the garden." Evelyn's heart melted. "That's a wonderful idea." He picked up a single petal that had fallen from a rose they'd planted and tucked it gently inside the box. Then he handed it to her. "You can add something too, Grandma." She thought for a moment, then took off a small silver button from her cardigan, one that Richard had sewn years ago when it fell loose. She placed it inside the box beside the rose petal. "There," she said softly. "Now it's our memory box." Noah beamed. "We can keep it here forever." They spent the rest of the morning tending the garden, laughing, talking, and sharing quiet moments. When it got too warm, they sat in the shade with lemonade. Evelyn found herself telling stories she hadn't told in years. How she met Richard at a local dance. How they built the house together. How he'd once planted sunflowers in the shape of a heart just to make her smile. Noah listened carefully, eyes wide. "He must have loved you a lot," he said. Evelyn smiled softly. "Yes, he really did." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the faint sound of wind chimes. Evelyn thought about all the years that had passed, all the laughter, the tears, the quiet evenings. And then she looked at Noah and saw a little bit of Richard in him, the kindness, the patience, the way he looked at the world with gentle wonder. By afternoon, clouds rolled in and light rain began to fall. They moved to the porch, sitting close while watching the garden shimmer under the drizzle. Noah wrapped himself in a blanket, his head resting lightly against her arm. "Grandma," he said quietly, "do you ever talk to Grandpa, even though he's not here?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, every day, in my own way. Sometimes I tell him what I cooked for dinner, or how the garden's doing. It makes me feel like he's still listening. Do you think he can hear you?" She looked out at the rain. "I think love doesn't end when someone leaves us. It just changes where it lives." Noah thought about that for a moment, then whispered, "I hope he can see how happy you look today." The simple sentence caught her off guard. She turned to him, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "You think I look happy?" He nodded, smiling softly. "You smile different now, like the sun came back." Evelyn's throat tightened, her eyes misting. "You're too wise for your age, you know that." He grinned shyly. "Grandma, can I hug you?" She didn't answer, she just opened her arms. Noah stepped forward, wrapping his small arms around her. But this hug felt different, deeper, filled with warmth, understanding, and something unspoken. It wasn't just a boy hugging his grandmother. It was love healing the quiet cracks time had left behind. Evelyn felt tears slide down her cheeks. But she didn't wipe them away. Instead, she held him closer, whispering, "Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know how much this means to me." He looked up at her, confused but smiling. "It's just a hug, Grandma." "No," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "It's much more than that." They stayed like that for a while, the rain tapping softly against the porch roof, the world around them peaceful and still. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn felt lighter. As if a weight she'd carried for years had finally lifted. Later that evening. After dinner, Noah's parents came to pick him up. Evelyn helped him pack his things, folding his clothes neatly into his small suitcase. As they reached the door, Noah turned to her and said, "I'll come back soon, Grandma. We still have to make another birdhouse, remember?" She smiled through the ache in her heart. "I'll be waiting." He gave her another quick hug before running to the car. Evelyn stood on the porch, waving as they drove away. The moment the car disappeared around the corner, silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was gentle. When she went back inside, she noticed the small wooden box sitting on the kitchen counter, their memory box. She opened it slowly, seeing the silver button and the rose petal. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were warm, peaceful tears. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Noah." That night, Evelyn sat in Richard's chair, a blanket draped around her shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the moonlight spilled through the window, casting soft silver light across the room. She closed her eyes, thinking about the hug, about how something so small could heal so much. She realized then that life had quietly given her a second chance not to start over, but to remember how to feel alive again. Love hadn't left her after all. It had just found a new way to reach her, through her grandson's heart. When morning came, Evelyn went out to the garden again. The air was crisp, the flowers glistening with dew. She noticed something new, a tiny bird resting inside the birdhouse she and Noah had built. For a long time, she stood there, watching it flutter its wings. She smiled and whispered, "Welcome home," as she turned back toward the house. The wind brushed against her cheek, soft and familiar, almost like a caress. And in that quiet, she could almost hear Richard's voice, See, Eve? You were never alone. Evelyn closed her eyes, tears falling freely now, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Life had surprised her once again, not with grand gestures, but with moments that reminded her of love's quiet endurance. That afternoon, she called Noah. When he answered, she said, "Sweetheart, the birdhouse. It's already got a guest." He gasped. "Really? That's awesome, Grandma." "Yes," she said with a gentle laugh. "And you know what? I think it's a sign of that love always finds a way back home." Noah didn't fully understand, but he smiled anyway. "You're the best, Grandma." As the call ended, Evelyn placed the phone down, still smiling. She looked out the window again at the garden, the sunlight, the birdhouse, and felt a deep, quiet peace settle over her heart. The house, once a place of silence and sorrow, was now filled with new memories, laughter, and hope. And as she sat in her chair, she whispered one final time, "Thank you, my dear boy. You gave me back the part of me I thought was gone forever." That evening, when the golden light of sunset touched the garden once more, Evelyn stood there and closed her eyes. The wind rustled gently, the flowers swayed, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a child's laughter echoed in her memory. She smiled, knowing that the world, even after loss, could still surprise her, all because of one simple, unexpected hug.